Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Triple N Media. I am Dr. Nik Nikam. We are delighted you could join us. Today, we are going to be talking about a particular topic that most of us don't like to talk about. But being in the medical profession for more than 35 years, time and again, we come across a situation where we have to make certain decisions which are not very pleasant or pleasing. So we have three special guests who are going to enlighten us on this particular topic, which is mortality, that is death or dying. That reminds me, I just got an email from the American Association of Physicians of Indian origin. One of the past president's son had an untimely death, which came as a shock to the entire Indian community. And he was just about to graduate from the nephrology fellowship. It also reminds me in 1980 when I had just started my medical practice, I had one person who choked on a piece of steak. He was in the hospital for 10 months in a vegetative state. His wife used to drive all the way from Pasadena to Southwest Memorial Hospital for 10 months. When I saw that, I could not imagine, what is medicine, what is miracle, and what is mortality. They all have one thing in common, it is, uncertainty. We never know whether the medicine is going to work for a given patient, even if we try all these things. And we never know when the mortality is going to come, how it's going to come, and, what are the consequences. So, talking about mortality, I have three special guests. My guest right next to me is Dr. Glenn Wilkerson. Right?
Yes, sir.
And next to him is Dr. Dave Mason. I should kind of paraphrase it. That is Reverend Dr. Mason. And next to him is a cardiologist, a good friend of mine, Dr. Ramesh Patel. And we are talking about a new book they have just released. It's called The Reflections of Mortality. It is dealing with mortality and people who are terminally ill, and how do we approach this particular problem. So let me start off, gentlemen. Can you give one sentence introduction about yourselves, and then we'll jump right into this beautiful reflections on mortality.
My mother would want me to give a paragraph.
Sure.
One sentence?
Yes.
Well, I served as a minister of a church in Northwest Houston for 35 years, and now I work as president of an organization called ARC, Adults Related to Kids, helping teachers and parents to create loving, caring relationships with children and students. Okay?
I've also been a minister for now 38 years and worked with Glenn, and I've been a teacher and professor of philosophy for about half that long. Also, I've taught English, and I'm a novelist as well.
Ramesh?
I'm Dr. Ramesh G. Patel.
He had to speak.
I'm a cardiologist. Since 1976, I've been practicing in America. I graduated in India in 1972 and came to America in 1972. And I've been in practice I've been in Houston area, in Pasadena especially, since 1989 and practicing cardiology. And one little opportunity I had, I really appreciate that Dr. Wilkerson invited me to join writing his book. And I was amazed myself. I had a dream for a long time, but that dream came true this time for the first time in my life, where I was able to contribute to writing in the book indirectly. We will know more about it later.
That's fascinating.
Ramesh got 5 sentences. Did I get 3 more?
Yes. Yes, please do. Go ahead.
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, before we go any further, I would like to show it to you. This is called Reflections on Mortality, and it is available on Amazon.com in both print and in Kindle version. So please check it out. I would say just download the Kindle version and start reading. And okay, first of all, Dr. Glenn Wilkerson, I want to find out, why is this book important?
Okay, just want to point out Reflections on Mortality, and then the subtitle is Insights into Meaningful Living. And that's really the key to the book, is how we can deal with mortality in a manner that compels us to live meaningful lives in the here and now. As to why I think the book's important, Well, I think that we live in a society where tremendous denial in regard to our own mortality. In fact, I think that probably the one word that is seen as the biggest profanity we can utter is the word death.
Yeah.
You know, in today's society, people will say anything and everything in terms of words that you and I, the 3 or 4 of us, would have considered, hey, how can you say that publicly? But the one word that people will not say is the word death.
Absolutely, because I've been in the medical field for almost close to 40 years. Even when we have a dying cancer patient, they don't want to bring up that word.
No, we say people have passed.
Yeah.
And it's because I think the word itself makes us think about our own mortality. And for most of us, that is our greatest fear, the unknown of death. So I think the book is important because it helps us to talk about the reality of our own mortality, and when we come to terms with the fact that life is short, and who knows, this may be our last day. It compels us to live life more meaningfully, more appreciatively. And I'm not saying that people who don't come to terms with their mortality can't live full lives. They can. But when we come to terms with our own mortality and recognize life is short, we live life in a much more richer way, because we realize that we need to be paying attention to our relationships and the things that are truly important in our life. We need to engage in as meaningful living as we possibly can.
Yeah.
That's what a recognition of our mortality can do for us, and that's what the book.
That's fascinating. Dr. Ramesh and myself are cardiologists. We are materialistic approach to medicine, and we have to have facts and objective findings to say there is cessation of body functions when the heart and the brain stops. But you two are philosophers. So, Dr. Mason, maybe you can tell us from your perspective, what do you think is the mortality from the time we are born to if there is a next life after?
Well, I would say, of course, that death is the great common denominator, and we need to deal with it. So many of us are interested in living well. Like in this neighborhood around here, I am more impressed with people who die well.
Die with dignity. I mean, that's what we call in medical field.
Like Socrates and others who decide when it is time to go, and they do that. Now, it's important, I feel, to live meaningfully up to that point. There are so many people that who have not made a will, for example. This is part of the denial that you've been talking about. Give you a quick metaphor out at the beach. If you're in the waves and it's like death is in this great beach ball, and you're denying it, you're pushing it under the water as best you can, and you're able to do it. You're able to deny it and put it out of sight. But while you're doing that, what else can you do? Very little. You might as well let the air out of that, examine your own mortality. It's coming, and then you're free to do other things meaningfully in your life. And I'm a teacher of philosophy, and you do need to reckon with these. It's part of the baseline questions that we ask in our mortality in this life. And if you're going to ask some of the fundamental, foundational questions about life, of course you have to deal with death. There is no other way.
That's beautiful. Dr. Ramesh Patel, let me ask you, you're a cardiologist, and I'm sure you come across from time to time patients who are end-stage heart failure or any type of cardiac problems who are on the verge of, passing on to the next life, if you believe in that. How do you approach this when you're dealing with especially the family?
Nick, thank you for giving this opportunity to talk.
Yeah, you have to hold microphone
about
close.
The reflections
Ramesh.
on mortality.
Yeah.
It is a great opportunity to talk about this subject, which is, as everybody said, very, very difficult to even talk. But the way I feel about the mortality from religious and spiritual point of view, and also from the medical standpoint of view, is that most everyone has a fear of death. And like everybody says, denial. We are in denial. But at the same time, we are afraid to die. We have encountered that kind of scenario many, many times in our lives. But on the other hand, we talk about that in my chapter on this subject. There are two kinds of deaths that mainly we can divide. One is the fear of death. Person really does not want to die, but he's dying and he's gone.
Yeah.
Second person, he says, I'm ready. Let me go. The patient has requested me, let me go.
Nice.
I have just recent experience. One of my friends is a pastor also, and his mother died at the age of 92. The patient requested me just about a month ago, Dr. Patel, please let me go home. I want to die in my home environment, and I want to be with my God. I want to return my home happily. And we really did respect her wish. And this is the kind of the people don't have a fear of death.
That's true.
Because they have lived their life to the fullest extent.
Mm-hmm. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching Triple N Media. We are talking about reflections on mortality, insights into meaningful living by Robert Brooks and Dr. Glenn Wilkerson. And who is this third gentleman? Is it?
That's
the
Doctor of Ministry.
Doctor of Ministry. Okay.
Yeah. And
that shows how
we co-edited.
Oh, I see. Wonderful. Yeah. So this is available on Amazon.com in both Kindle and in print version. We are talking about how to deal with the ultimate journey in life, and that is mortality. Okay, Dr. Wilkerson, let's talk about what inspired you to write this book and who is it targeted to?
Well, a number of years ago, I was at a national conference of my particular denomination and was in the midst of receiving an award for my particular church being the fastest growing church in our denomination. And I was all puffed up and strutting around, and in the midst of the ceremony, I got a telephone call saying, return to Houston. Your infant son has died. 6-month-old, precious little boy, died of crib death. And all of a sudden it dawned on me in the airplane coming from Amarillo back to Houston that all these things about fortune, fame, money, the ways in which we try to deny death. You know, we get powerful enough, if we accumulate enough, if we take enough youth-inducing drugs, then we'll never die. And it's a fallacy. And it dawned on me on the airplane coming back from Amarillo to Houston to be with my family that everything else really is smoke and mirrors. All the ways in which we try to deny death in this society, it's just smoke and mirrors. The only things that truly count are life and love, and how we spend our time exercising our ability to live well and to love well. That's all that truly counts. So the genesis of the book came from a friend of mine by the name of Dr. Duke Sampson, who recently retired as the Chief of Staff of Neurosurgery at UT Medical School, Southwestern Medical School in Dallas. And Duke and I have been dear friends since the second grade. And Duke is Chief of Staff of Neurosurgery, and at the time was acclaimed the number one neurosurgeon in the world. At age 35, Duke wrote a paper and sent it to me entitled Mortality and the Neurosurgeon, and invited me as a minister to reply, Mortality and the Clergy Person. And Nick, I couldn't do it. I was 35 years old. I'd been in the ministry for 20 years. But all I really knew to say, if I was driving to a home where someone had a loved one die, was all those old bromides I learned in seminary. He's in a better place. It's God's will, that sort of thing. I really had nothing to say. So I put Duke's paper aside, Dr. Sampson's paper aside, and 25 years later, at age 70, I pulled it out and looked at it, and I said, I've been to enough deathbed sides now that I really think I have something to say about mortality, how to live well, how to love well, how to die well. And so I sat down and wrote my response. Gave the two papers to another dear friend of mine, Dr. Robert Brooks, who's a psychologist and is on staff at Harvard Medical School. and said, here's the 2 papers. What do you think? And Dr. Brooks said, I think this would make a good book. What I think you need to do is to solicit chapters from others who whose fields deal with death and dying, and said, you know what, I'll do that. But my daddy, I'm from Odessa, Texas, Nick, and my daddy had these old West Texas sayings. One of them was, the fox is the finder. I said, Bob Brooks, the fox is the finder. In other words, if you're clever enough to come up with an idea, you also have to find the solution to it. I think we should put together a book, but I want you to co-edit it with me, and you must write a chapter. And from that point forward, we solicited, there's 19 different chapters, people from a variety of fields of medicine, psychology, mental health, folks from various religions, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim. Yeah. Folks that from professions where they're dealing with death and dying, possibilities of an afterlife. How does our career impact our feelings about death and dying, and how do our personal feelings about death and dying impact our careers? And just got 19, I think, incredibly fascinating chapters, people dealing with that topic. And Dr. Patel, Ramesh, was kind enough to weigh in from the standpoint of death and dying from the vantage point of he's a cardiologist. At the same time, he's Hindu. Dave Mason is a Christian minister, and at the same time is a philosopher and a teacher, and examples of the types of folks that we've had weigh in on this. Funeral directors, hospice directors, as well as religious leaders, and people in the field of medicine.
That's fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Nik Nikam, and we are talking about how to anticipate and prepare for mortality. I mean, we never use that kind of terms in real life. No, it's a reality, because it's going to happen, and
it's going to happen.
Yeah, and it is important to be prepared. That reminds me of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the 70s. She was a psychiatrist, and she wrote a book on death and dying, where she had examined thousands of cancer patients, and she wrote how people go through various stages after the loss of a loved one, starting with shock, grief, anger, pain, resentment, and obsession with, bad substances, things like that, final reconciliation and recovery. So does your book deal with, how people face this and how they can get back to normal and reality?
Sure. In fact, Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death.
Yeah.
Grief. 5 stages of grief.
5 stages of grieving.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. 5 stages of grieving. She calls it grief work, because grieving is hard work. It's the hardest emotional work that we'll ever encounter. And the first stage is, as you mentioned, is denial. I just can't believe this is happening or has happened. Then bargaining. Well, if I'd done this, if I'd done that, if I'd made sure that John had gone to the hospital and got his regular checkups, and then guilt's a part of it as well. And then anger, just mad at God, mad at the person for dying. Depression, we just want to crawl in the hole and pull the world in over us because the grief is just so powerful. And then finally, acceptance, where we move to the point where we say, I don't like the fact that my loved one died, but life is good, I'm ready to move on with it. And the truth be told, we go through these stages of grief, not only when a loved one has died. If we become aware of our own terminal illness, we go through those stages of grief regarding our own mortality.
That is true. That's true. Yeah. Like, if somebody diagnoses a cancer, all of a sudden the entire life perception changes right that minute.
Like that.
Absolutely.
Like
that. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching Triple N Media. I am Dr. Nik Nikam, and my special guests are Dr. Glenn Wilkerson, Dr. Dave Mason, and Dr. Ramesh Patel. We are talking about their new book, which is Reflections on Mortality, Insights into Meaningful Living. So the way you're describing to me, it looks like this book is for people of all walks of life. Could you highlight on that one, Dr. Mason?
Well, yes, I think it can be important for many people, certainly those in helping professions. Now, I'm a teacher as well as clergy, and teaching philosophy, you deal with death in abstract terms. But when you're a clergy and we have to do funerals, it's very right in your face, and you've got to deal with it there. And you need to speak from the perspective of your faith. You have to speak the words of John 11, which Jesus, if you will, says we will have a pleasant afterlife. But after the book had come out, of all places, I saw a bumper sticker that I thought, I wish I'd known that and seen that so I could put it in my chapters. It says simply, do not be afraid of dying.
Yeah.
Be afraid of not living.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And really, that sums up the book. That's the premise of the book.
Well, it is. There's a lot more in the book than that, but how do you live a meaningful life? Facing your own mortality, preparing for when you will not be here. Yeah. Well, I believe that if you confront and deal with constructively, thoughtfully, your own mortality, it frees you up to do more and different, like you've let the beach ball go. Nice. Go and live your life fully. It doesn't last that long. So get after it.
That's very interesting. So in the same context, this book could also be useful to all the family members and relatives who have to face the aftermath of a loss of a loved one and may serve as a therapeutic guidance.
The book was constructed so that it would appeal not only to the general public but also to professionals as well as they deal with people through their profession.
You are right, because, like me and Ramesh have to convince the families when they are terminally ill, nothing medicine can change the outcome. So they have to go to what's called hospice. And that takes a lot of effort. It takes the doctor, the social worker, the hospital, and the hospice team. It's an entire teamwork, and everybody has to, and the family has to agree, and everybody in the family has to agree. So it is a pretty challenging one, and you touch upon that one. Maybe you can elaborate.
Well,
from
the medical standpoint, we deal with this, as you say, day to day, and we have encountered. That's what is reflected in the one of the chapters. Is that and as I alluded to earlier, people are ready to die. Like I gave an example earlier, much easier to deal with them with the hospice or whatever the arrangements we can make at home, at the hospital, in the long-term care situations. These are the scenarios that we come up with and help the patient and the family during those terminal days. On the other hand, the difficult cases are the ones that are not ready and prepared to die. We have to face those too. The way I have understood the concept of living and dying is that we are here on the face of the earth as guided by a higher force. And we believe in the rebirth. And this life is only short journey. And then we are moving on to the next journey. So really there is no fear. There should not be any fear. I have stated this many times upon conversations with the patients and the families, even with the patients. And they understand, and actually their tension, their anxiety is a little bit better. Can't go away completely, but at least can make some difference in their terminal days, terminal hours at times. And that is very important to communicate with the patient and the family that it is inevitable for all of us. We are all standing in line. I mentioned that many times to the people. And it's just sooner or later we are going to get there. But the most important thing from the Hinduism perspective is that there is another life waiting for us to go on based on what we have done in this life. That's what we have written in the book. And that is what many times helps people calm their anxiety.
That's what, it is. You make an important point, which brings up my next question. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about the reflections of mortality, insights into meaningful living, and this is available on Amazon.com and in Kindle version and also in print version. Please do buy this one, and this is a book that is good for the patient, the entire family, and also for healthcare professionals, as you said, for doctors, nurses, social workers, and the people who deal with hospice type of services. That brings us, earlier when we started off, you talked about faith plays a very important role, and there's a saying in our Indian language, the closer you get to the death, the closer you get to God, even if you're an atheist. I mean, it's a saying. And maybe you can enlighten on the role of faith in the terminal phases. And there are hundreds of different faiths, and how do you connect with each different faith as it relates to mortality or death?
It's an interesting question. One of the chapters is written by an atheist.
Is that right?
Yes. Wanted to get this tremendous variety of responses to the issue of death and dying, possibilities of an afterlife, and all of the authors essentially come to the same conclusion, that death is inevitable, and once we accept the fact that life is short, it compels us to live today more appreciatively, because this may be our very last day, and in the process, to try to find meaning in existence. I've been to so many deathbeds, and I've not once have I ever heard, for example, senior executives from oil companies, people that have accomplished a lot in their lives. Never once have I heard them talk about, well, this big deal I was able to generate on the north slope, or this big bringing together corporations and
mergers and things like that.
Yeah, they don't talk about their accomplishments. They want to talk about their family. If they're religious, they want to talk about their relationship with God. It all comes back to relationships and unconditional love. And this is not a book of the dead. It's a book on how to face our mortality, and through that process come to the realization that we need to live each day as fully, richly, as meaningfully as we possibly can. And all of the authors come to that ultimate conclusion.
That's fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about reflections of mortality, insight into meaningful living, and my special guests are Dr. Glenn Wilkerson and Dr. Dave Mason and Dr. Ramesh Patel. You talked about...
They may want to weigh in on the role of faith in this.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Dave and Ramesh.
Well, you were talking about essentially reincarnation. Yeah. I think a lot of Christian people have difficulty enough with the incarnation. Friends in the Catholic Church chuckle at Protestants who need everything explained, and they said, well, go ahead, explain the incarnation. Yeah. It's a divine mystery. There are things we don't know. And whatever is next, well, we will find out. But when it's important, and this book points out very ably that there is not one outlook on death. There are many faith perspectives. There are perspectives that have nothing to do with faith. I want to mention that Sigmund Freud said that the two generating forces for any religion, the first is cleansing. We feel the need to be cleansed in some way for whatever we've done. And also the fear of death is a lot of the generating force in religion. So it has psychological ramifications, certainly faith ramifications, and there are physical ones as well. We change, our bodies change as we get older. We can feel death coming on when we are near their end. But our medical society will extend death beyond its natural end.
Yes.
We are able to do that now, and that's not good in many ways, but it puts it right in front of you. You've got to deal with whether or not this person wants to continue living, should continue living, and who's going to sign the papers. How is this going to get done? Pulling the plug in that course term. So there's a lot to it, and you can find in this book as I have, different perspectives that you have not heard yet from thoughtful, professional people who have been looking at death and working with the dying for many years.
That's fascinating. Ramesh, maybe you can highlight on, from the Hindu perspective, what does death mean and how Hindus approach this particular microphone.
I also belong to not only Hinduism, but the Swaminarayan faith, BAPS organization you are very familiar with. It is an international organization. You can look it up, baps.org. But Swaminarayan Bhagwan has, and that was the most recent reincarnation of our Lord God. And as God has promised reincarnation periodically, as there was a need for the God to descend down to the face of the earth. And Swaminarayan Bhagwan has mentioned many concepts of living and dying, and how to live and enjoy the life, at the same time be prepared for inevitable. And I have encountered so many examples in my life right here in Houston and internationally, where people are embracing death, if you will, which is very hard to say for ordinary public, and even the survivors, to face with this, like embracing the death, inevitable. My son, my mom, my dad has passed away. How I deal with it? I have dealt with myself in this way. All have dealt with it, but we deal with it in a different ways. You mentioned about different stages after death. Yeah. All those stages for the survivors they have to go through. And to some extent, even the person who's dying has to go through this to come to an understanding the reality. Both these scenarios are much well and better handled with the help of the faith. With our faith, we know that I'm going to be with the Lord in heaven, and we call Akshardham. It becomes kind of a pleasant event for me to be able to join my Lord. And I really do not have to worry about the material world at this point. It is really a great concept. If the people can buy into this, we are happily leaving this earth, and we can happily return back.
That's fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about a new book that is Reflections on Mortality, Insights into Meaningful Living. My special guests have been Dr. Glenn Wilkerson, Dave Mason, and Dr. Ramesh Patel. When we were in medical school, the definition of pathology was the death teach the living. And you have a chapter with that title, and let's conclude with, explaining, what you mean by death teach the living in your particular book.
Death teaches us to live well.
Yeah.
Well, again, you're talking about your particular faith perspective, Ramesh. From the vantage point of a Christian minister, I love that parable that Jesus told about the rich man who kept accumulating stuff and putting it in barns, and then he accumulated more things and had to build bigger barns and bigger barns and bigger barns, and finally got to a point where his entire property is filled with his barns and all these things he had accumulated and all the wealth he had brought to himself. And he said, well, now I can relax. Well, that night he died. Jesus said, you accumulated all these things. Who will get them now? And Jesus' point was, you should have spent your life, rather than denying death by accumulating all these things, should have spent it more meaningfully in terms of relationships with loved ones and engaging in activities that would make the world a better place for having lived in it. So Jesus, I think, in talking about death, he tried to point to the fact that life is short, live it as meaningfully and as appreciatively as you possibly can. So that's how the lessons of death, in terms of it's going to happen. Yes. Life is short, so seize the day and live it positively, meaningfully, and with unconditional love.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Dr. Mason.
Well, amen. I agree with these sentiments, and different faiths may approach it differently, but we all walk that path, it's a fact that we know it is coming. Make it a part of your life. Make it a meaningful end to the living that you have been doing. Of course, there is some fear. That's only natural. When I contemplate my non-existence, I can't do it. All I know is my existence, in philosophical terms. But go ahead, live it out, accept the fact of your death, which is coming, and do what you can with today. Again, do not fear dying, fear not living.
Yes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like you to visit Amazon.com and get a copy of Reflections on Mortality, Living Insights into Meaningful Living. It's available in Kindle and also in print version. And this is a book for all ages and all walks of life, so because it gives you an insight into what life is and how do we prepare for the final journey, because we never know when the final journey is going to hit in our lives. So we might as well be prepared and enjoy the life on the way to the fulfillment of our lives to the fullest extent.
like a friend of mine said, he said, I believe in an afterlife. I think it's home.
Yeah.
But I ain't homesick yet.
That's beautiful. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to conclude this presentation. I am Dr. Nik Nikam, and my special guests have been Dr. Glenn Wilkerson and Dr. Dave Mason and Dr. Ramesh Patel. Thank you, doctors, and it's a pleasure having you on our Triple N Media. And ladies and gentlemen, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook Triple N Media. And we will see you next time. I am Dr. Nik Nikam. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.